The forgotten ones. Okay, guys, we're going.
Okay. Well, thank you. Tonight we're going to talk about affirmative action. My name is Chastity. I'm going to go over the history. Olivia is going to talk about pros and cons. Suzette is going to talk about what HR should know. And Stacy is going to talk about where it applies. So I'm going to start off by talking about what led up to affirmative action. Okay. So slavery. Slaves were brought into the United States in 1619. The agony and anguish in which slaves would succumb to in America would be beyond any suffering imaginable. They were here brought to help in the aid of production of crops, such as tobacco. They were chained, beaten, and branded like cattle. Here is a timeline to give you kind of an example of how many years that slavery went on in the United States, and the segregation, and just a small portion of it is freedom. So there was a gentleman called Frederick Douglass, who was a human rights leader, and he wrote a speech, "What is freedom? It is the right to choose one's own employment. Certainly it means that if it means anything, and when any individual or combination of individuals undertake to decide to any man when he shall work, where he shall work, he or they practically reduce him to slavery." Now, Jim Crow, I don't know if anybody heard of Jim Crow, but these were laws that were put in place by state and local enforcing racial segregation in the southern United States until 1965. The bodies of these laws were institutionalized a number of economic and educational social disadvantages. These laws were to segregate for public schools, public places, public transportations, drinking fountains for whites and blacks. And also, President Wilson at the time also discriminated against military by sending in photos. Now, in 1961, President John F. Kennedy introduced an executive order mandating government contractors to take affirmative action to ensure that applicants are employed and that employees are treated during employment without regard to their race, creed, color, or national origin. And the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission was also created. Now, in 1964, Congress passed the Public Law, which was a Civil Rights Act, forbid discrimination on basis of sex, race, color, religion, or national origin. It ended unequal application of voter registration requirements and racial segregation in schools. Now, Lyndon Johnson had a great speech. It was, "You don't take a person who for years have been hobbled by chains and liberate him, bring him up to the starting line of a race, and then say you are free to compete with all others and still just believe that you have been completely fair," which I thought was a really good speech. So, President Lyndon Johnson upheld the affirmative action after President Kennedy was assassinated, that all government contractors to take affirmative action towards prospective minority employees in all aspects of hiring and employment contractors. And they must document it as well, which was a big factor. So now they were held liable. So, and also it was amended in 1965 to give equal opportunity to those of different genders. Yay, women. So, and then they also changed it, I believe, in 1991. And then in University of California versus Bake in 1978, a landmark Supreme Court case, Alan Bake, a white applicant, was rejected twice, even though there was minority applications admitted with lower scores than him. He maintained that judging him on the basis of his race was a violation of Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Now, Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972 prohibited discrimination on the basis of sex in any federal-funded education program or activity. Its objective was to avoid the use of federal money to support sex discrimination in education programs and to provide individual citizens effective protection from those practices. Now, in 1969, President Richard Nixon issued a Philadelphia order, which was a test case because, as Assistant Secretary of Labor Arthur Fletcher explained, the craft unions and the construction industry are among the worst offenders against the equal opportunity laws, openly hostile towards letting blacks into a closed circuit. Now, in 1995, President Clinton signed a direct order avowing support for affirmative action, stating that all affirmative action programs be reviewed in the cabinet secretary, or by the cabinet secretary, and that there was to meet 4 tests. They were to reorganize if they created a quota, created preference for unqualified individuals, and if they created reverse discrimination. Now, in President Reagan's administration, he actually cut funding for the Equal Opportunity Commission and the Civil Rights Division. He believed that the government promoted reverse discrimination and should relax its efforts. And at that time, the EEOC filed 60% fewer cases in 1984. Affirmative action also amended the, so that way they give rights to people with disabilities. So they had be qualified applicants in the pool, and 1/2 of working age people with disabilities were actually unemployed. And then they also amended it to let people of the Vietnam War to be a part of the affirmative action for those who served their country and giving them equal opportunity as well. Okay. So why do we have all these rules in place and all these amendments? Well, if you think about affirmative action, you think about what your views are, whether or not if we didn't have them, would people have the same opportunities they have today? I'm a firm believer in affirmative action, and I think it's still needed today. And one example I have is I work in the health industry, and we refer a lot of our patients to specialists. I have a really good friend. She's an African-American ENT, and you know, we refer to a lot of people, and unfortunately she's African-American. What's the big deal, right? Well, people would actually come back and say, oh, well, you didn't tell me she was black. We didn't know that that was actually a reason for referring patients. But that concludes mine. Olivia's next.
Okay. Hi everyone, I'm going to be talking to you about the pros and cons argument from each side of affirmative action and some statistics that will relate to the topic when we think about it. And I think it's very important to know about this, especially like in this day and age. I'm going to give you a formal definition of affirmative action, a set of procedures designed to eliminate unlawful discrimination between applicants, remedy the results of such prior discrimination, and prevent such discrimination in the future. Applicants may be seeking admission to an education program or looking for professional employment. I'm going to start with the pro side. So the first argument for the pro side, affirmative action is a way to ensure that diversity is obtained and maintained in schools and in the workplace. In doing so, it also helps create tolerant communities because it exposes people to a variety of cultures and ideas that may be different from their own. Our second argument, it helps disadvantaged people who come from areas of the country where there might not be as much opportunities. So they're more able to advance where otherwise they could not. In other words, they're evening the playing field. One has more of a chance. A third argument for the pro side, affirmative action is a way to help compensate for years of oppression for minority groups. So like they started late in the race, as you can see, they were like had to go through a lot more than like what people did. The fourth pro argument, affirmative action policies help create a more diverse work and learning environment. Diversity, in turn, gives 2 key advantages. One is adaptability in terms of problem solving, so there's more different minds working together. And 2, a better poised to serve multicultural communities. Fifth argument is by maintaining affirmative action policies, a business can expand its opportunities to include government contracts. If you work with the government and you have a contract with them, you need an affirmative action plan. The sixth and final argument, For embracing affirmative action can provide businesses with means of making moral commitment to the ideal of justice or equal treatment for all. The advantage of such a moral stand within the workplace remains indirect, but it can help draw employees who share similar beliefs. Moving on to the con side of affirmative action argument. They claim that affirmative action is reverse discrimination. In the past, discrimination against certain minority groups does not justify present discrimination against non-minority groups. All people are equal under the law of the United States of America and should be treated as such. The second argument for the con side, affirmative action destroys the idea of meritocracy, instead puts race as the dominant factor when it comes to admissions and hiring policies. The best people for the position should be put there regardless of their race. The third con argument is students and workers who are put into a position through affirmative action are often not fully ready for the task. Not only is this not good for the university or the company, but it also is not good for these students and workers because it can affect and lower their self-esteem. I feel like that they can't do as much. The fourth argument, the first part of the fourth argument, affirmative action reinforces stereotypes and racism because of my previous point with the self-esteem. People given a position purely because of affirmative action often is not qualified, and the idea that all people of that race must be stupid is perpetuated. Also, it presupposes that people of the same color and are from the lower class and therefore need help. This also reinforces stereotypes and embeds them into the system, so it's kind of a not-ending cycle, which doesn't help anyone at all. The fifth and final argument, simply having people of different races and ethnicities in the workplace or university do not necessarily mean they're going to have a diversity in opinion. People within this with the same skin color are not necessarily do not necessarily have the same opinion or even the same culture. All right, we're going to move on to statistics. Like, now that you've heard both sides of the argument, I think these statistics are important to know when you're applying them to affirmative action and see like why we should have them or we should not have them. According to one study of 1,000 employees in the Boston and Chicago area, applicants with white-sounding names were twice as likely to be called for interviews as those qualified with black-sounding names. With education, more than 1 million students won't graduate from high school, and a disproportionate number will be African American, Latino, and Native American. More than 80% of high-income graduates go into college compared to 66% of middle-class income students and just 52% of low-income graduates. These gaps haven't narrowed in 30 years. Now I'm going to talk about in the university. Affirmative action programs have resulted in doubling or tripling the number of minorities applying to colleges, making schools more representative of their surrounding communities. In 1998, California abolished its affirmative action programs, and minority students' admissions to the UC Berkeley fell by 61%, and UCLA fell by 36%. Moving on to pay, on average, college-educated African Americans earn about $20,000 less than the college-educated white man, and a woman with a master's degree makes about $5,000 less than the average man with an undergraduate degree. Bringing it to like today, the concern is with President Trump's appointing of the new Supreme Court Justice Gorsuch, there's been some speculation that there might be some changes in affirmative action cases, but most analysts don't think it will be that big of a deal looking back at other cases. So it shouldn't weigh it too badly. I don't really have a story for affirmative action. As far as I know, not really been affected by it, but my opinion, I think that we should have it. I think it's very important. I don't think it's a disadvantage to anyone. I think equal just needs to be given the opportunity, and given the opportunity, they succeed. So now on to Suzette.
Thank you, Olivia. As managers and HR professionals, we must understand that affirmative action is a statutory requirement by the Executive Order 11246 and not about hiring quotas. In recruitment practices, the main purpose is to increase the pool of candidates from a diverse group by broadening the recruitment efforts. the data confirms